Hi, my name is Jeff Foster. I'm a technical marketing engineer for Cisco Systems, and welcome to our August Tech Talk. What's new in the world of UCS Central version 1.2? This is the next Tech Talk in a long-running series, which are available at communities.cisco.com/UCS. So I encourage you not only to participate today actively in the chat window, but also head over to communities and continue the conversation beyond today. Check out some of the other tech talks and feel free to engage in the community ongoing. We've got a great panel assembled today. So with us we have Jacob Van Ewyk, Ewyk Williams, and Brad TerEick. And I'll pause here and let each of them introduce themselves. And how about we introduce ourselves in that order, gentlemen? So,
Good. Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Van Ewyk. I'm a product manager in the UCS management group, primarily focused on UCS Central and some of the UCS Manager releases.
Hello, my name is Ewyk Williams. I'm a technical marketing engineer for Cisco. I focus on UCS Central, UCS Manager, all of our integrations that we do with our API, and one of our Powershell experts.
Hello, my name is Brad TerEick. I'm a data center architect with Cisco, and I focus on UCS software. And over the past few years, I've been focusing specifically around UCS Central.
Oh, glad to have you here. It'll be a great hour session. But Jacob, let's go ahead and get this Tech Talk kicked off. So for those on the Tech Talk here that are new to Central, can you explain a little bit about what is UCS Central, what are the main use cases, and why people are using it?
Absolutely. So for those of you who are familiar with UCS, know that it's set up into domains. And UCS Manager is built into the Fabric Interconnects, and that can manage anywhere up to 160 servers. Of course, you may have multiple domains, whether it's for for scale reasons or for redundancy or because you have multiple locations, etc. So the next natural question is, how do you manage multiple domains? And that's where UCS Central comes in. It really is the manager of UCS managers. And those domains can be local within a data center. They can be a different data center that is some distance away, or they can be remote office, branch office locations over a wide area network. So what UCS Central provides as the manager of UCS managers are a couple of key capabilities. First of all, it provides a crawl, walk, run model. So you can use it in very basic ways all the way up to the most advanced ways and grow as it makes sense for your organization. And the first way that most people use it is as an information dashboard. It gives them visibility across all of their UCS domains. And when we say visibility, we mean things like having centralized inventory across all the domains, centralized faults, so you can see the faults in all those domains. I've run into customers who have many domains, and they said, yeah, we had faults on a domain that we didn't know about for 2 weeks because we forgot to check that domain. Well, this brings them all centrally. UCS Manager collects statistics, particularly around bandwidth, power consumption, temperature, and fan speed. UCS Central gets past those statistics, and while UCS Manager can hold those statistics for 24 hours, UCS Central can hold them for 2 weeks with the internal database, or a year or more with an external database. And so we can bring all of those statistics and get better data on our environment from them, from UCS Central. And finally, it has a centralized KVM and UCS Manager launchers. So you can go into Central and launch KVM sessions, launch UCS Manager. And one of the nice things we've heard from customers is sometimes, for instance, their operations folks get an error message. They know it's a UCS server, but they don't know which domain it is in. So they no longer have to figure out which domain it's in and log into UCS Manager to do that. They can launch it directly from UCS Central, and it contains their entire UCS environment. That's kind of the first step a lot of customers take. And that's really a step of looking at information across these environments. The second step we traditionally see people do is essentially the setup of a new domain. So what's involved in that? It's setting up administrative policies for the new domain. Things like call home settings and DNS and time zones and things like that. And that can all be done from UCS Central. Setting up ID pools. Well, instead of setting up an ID pool for each individual domain, we can now set them up globally in UCS Manager. So whether it's worldwide names, MAC addresses, IP addresses, UUIDs, etc., they can all be set up globally instead of locally. And this allows our customers, if they have to add another domain and they've got UCS Central set up, to get a new domain up and running in minutes instead of hours or more to get all these things set up. One of the interesting things that we normally see at this level, one of the use cases that just about every customer we've seen uses is that they use UCS Central to do backups of their UCS Manager instances as well as UCS Central. Those can be stored in the UCS Central virtual machine or exported to and a copy put on a remote file share as well. And then finally, you get to the meat of what UCS Manager does, and that is the policies and the global service profiles, that definition of what that server is. And all of those can be put in UCS Central as global policies. Global policies can be used still by UCS Manager as well, so you don't have to do everything through UCS Central. And then ultimately, you can have global service profiles. Same idea as a service profile in UCS Manager, except that it's global. Now, there are a couple key things to note about this. If it's global, it means that if you have, let's say, a global service profile template for VMware, you can have the same consistent standardized definition across multiple domains, especially if it's an updating template. You can make sure no matter where you put something, it is the same and it's standardized. And we know there's a lot of benefits, particularly from a support perspective, from having a standardized environment. The other thing is, because this can move back and forth between domains, we can now shut down a workload on one server and take that service profile and move it to another domain or to another server. And that server can be within the same domain, it can be a different domain in the same location, or it can be a different domain in a different location. For instance, moving a workload from, let's say, a data center in San Francisco to a data center in Amsterdam, as an example. And so that's how people are using UCS Central today, how our customers are using it, anywhere from a inventory, view-only mode, and a launcher mode, all the way up to customers who put their complete environment in UCS Central.
Great explanation, great overview. So I know I've had a couple of customers ask me, and it's a pretty regular question. There's a new version of UCS Manager 3.0. Could you tell us a little bit about this new release and how it impacts UCS Central version 1.2?
Absolutely. So UCS Manager 3.01 was released in July. And this is a little different than most of our standard UCS Manager versions in that it is a platform-specific release. It only works on our new 6324 Fabric Interconnect. It does not support our 6100 and 6200 series Fabric Interconnects. This 6324 Fabric Interconnect fits into, is a combination Fabric Interconnect and I/O module that slides into the I/O module of the standard 5108 chassis. It uses the same power supplies, it uses the same blades, but instead of being able to scale to 160 servers, it's designed to scale to that one chassis, and today we can actually put 7 rack mount servers off of it as well to get a domain of about 15 servers. This is primarily designed for remote office, branch office, for customers who need smaller size domains. I was talking to a customer yesterday who has a group of servers that have specific compliance requirements, and they may only want a very small domain for them. Customers who are providing services to their customers and want individual hardware for each customer. So things like that. So this is really a smaller scale version of UCS. And that's available and has been available since the end of July. And this is the version of UCS Manager that supports it. Now, a couple things to be aware of. First of all, it is based on UCS Manager 2.2.1, which was released last December. Since then, we've had a 2.2.2 release in May of this year. And because it was based on the December release, it doesn't support some of the new features that were released in May or some of the servers that were released in May. In fact, from a server perspective, it supports the B200 M3 server at this point at first release. We do have some interesting or some standard capabilities on this 6324. It is a standard version of UCS Manager. So it does inventory, and it does service profiles and policies and all the things you would expect. It does inventory of the 6324 Fabric Interconnect, its scalability port. It has a USB port on the Fabric Interconnect just for firmware upgrades. This is important because if you've got a remote office, let's say on a oil field in Angola, you might not want to download all your firmware images. It might be faster just to send it on a USB stick and then use that USB stick to update your firmware. And you'd still manage that from UCS Manager. It does have some specific other features that support this environment. One of the key areas, especially important for remote office, branch office, is that the power supplies, which are dual voltage power supplies, support 110 volt mode for our North American customers outside of the data center primarily. There are some caveats though to that. If you were to load up a chassis with 8 blades, with high bin processors and memory and lots of options, quite frankly, 110 volts will not power that whole chassis. So to enable that, we've got power capping features that we've added that measure the minimum and maximum power draw on boot up and can either stagger our server boot where appropriate, so they don't all start at the same time, because often that's where you have your peak draw. And they'll also make sure that if we run out of power capacity, that we don't start up additional servers and additional blades. So UCS Manager 3.01 was released in July. It is a platform-specific release that only works on the 6324 Fabric Interconnect, and it does have some limitations. So it's restricted to B200 M3 servers. It has UCS Manager 2.21 features, but not the 2.22 features and platforms and things like that.
So if a customer is running UCS Manager 3.0 on the new 6324 Fabric Interconnects, but they also have 6100 series or 6200 Fabric Interconnects running a different version of UCS Manager, what's the management tool to help them bring it all together and manage both those domain types?
And this is once again where UCS Central, the manager of UCS managers, comes in and plays a key role. UCS Central 1.2 was released to support UCS Manager 3.01 as well as previous versions of UCS Manager all the way back to 2.12a, which was released in July of 2013. So it can manage both of these types of domains, both the standard UCS domains as well as the 6324 Fabric Interconnect-based domains. And because it makes those capabilities available across all those domains, the capabilities are the same across those domains in most cases too. So the information dashboard, setting up the domain and administrative policies, the global policies, the global pools, the global profiles, being able to move workloads between different servers within or across domains. And so that's how we really bring all of that management back together, is in UCS Central. And particularly if you start thinking about 6324 Fabric Interconnect based domains in remote offices where you've got 3 or 4 servers, let's say, but you're now spreading out tens or hundreds of these domains, having a centralized manager becomes highly important, especially compared to maybe managing 3 or 4 domains in your data centers.
So besides UCS Manager 3.0 and the 6324 Fabric Interconnects, what are some of the other features that were introduced with UCS Central 1.2?
So we introduced a bunch of other features. Some of them are related directly to 6324 Fabric Interconnects, but also have benefits for other customers, such as doing a lot of work on WAN optimization. So we'll support UCS Manager in a remote location over essentially an entry-level consumer-grade DSL line up to 500 milliseconds latency, so we can support them in most places around the world with a decent network connection. Although, like I said, 500 milliseconds latency doesn't necessarily work over satellite links. But we've tested on 1.5 megabits per second, relatively high latency compared to at least within a data center. And so done a lot of optimization on that, and that actually works well for our data center customers as well, because that means we're using less bandwidth in their data center as well, although that's less of an issue. We've set this up so that we can configure from the FI Ethernet uplink and server ports. We don't do fiber channel related ports at this point. But one of the nice things, while this is brought out to support the 6324 Fabric Interconnect, it also works on all of our existing environments as well. Thinking about those ports, sometimes we do lose connections, particularly in remote locations. So we have the ability to, if you lose a connection, instead of automatically pushing down any changes that were made globally, we can set this into a suspend mode and run an estimate impact before we reconnect, so we know what's going to happen when we reconnect. And there are a number of other things we added. We put a virtual MIT or VMIT on there. In the background, UCS Central has multiple data management engines. This essentially provides a virtual information tree up front, so you don't need to know all those details. It makes scripting easier, third-party integration easier, power to them. We'll see some of that in the demos today. It's got a unified KVM launch manager, so when you get to the front screen, you can go into UCS Central, or you can go into the KVM Unified Launch Manager and see all of your KVMs across the entire environment without knowing which domain you need to go to. And finally, one of the other things that we supported was precision boot order support, which is when you, for instance, select a local disk, being able to select, well, from a local or local boot policy, not just is it local, but is it a flex flash card, is it a hard drive, is it et cetera, and stagger those in order. And that was something that was brought out in UCS Manager 2.21.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It sounds like there's a lot packed into this release. I do want to switch gears now and use the basis of what you've talked about and talk with Ewyk next. So, Ewyk, Jacob just shared with us a lot of information about UCS Central 1.2, the fact that the 6324 is the basis of a new domain, and customers might be running 2 domain types. So, can you talk a little bit about how UCS Central manages both of these domain types?
Yeah, and the interesting part about all of this is, the 6324 based domains, it's begin running the same version of UCS Manager. So you have all of those it's the same code base as what we run in our what we'll call UCS classic environments, so domains that have 6100s or 6200s. And the interesting thing about all of that is it runs that same software, has the same capabilities running in the 6324 that our 6100 and 6200 does. So the integration into something like Central was fairly easy. It has the same level of APIs that if UCS Central would talk to the UCS Classic environments, that it would talk to what we'll call miniature UCS or a 6324 based domain. And so that capability really is, it's very much the same, even though the form factor looks quite different, where the 6100 and 6200s reside outside of the chassis and can manage 160 servers, where the miniature UCS is a smaller domain size, again meant for that robo environment and whatnot. Again, since it uses that same level of software, pulling it into Central was not terribly difficult. The biggest areas of difference between a classic environment and the 6324 Fabric Interconnect is having that I/O module and the Fabric Interconnect capabilities in one physical item. So instead of having an I/O module in the back of a chassis and then the Fabric Interconnects outside of it, the 6324 is all of it's together and it's put in the back of a particular chassis. All of that software and all of that management plane is pretty much the same. So I think it would be great to switch over to show a demo of how it looks like both in the new UCS Manager GUI that supports the 6324 as well as UCS Central. We'll go ahead and share out my desktop here and we'll get a quick demo going. Before I do the share, one comment that a lot of people ask is that I get a lot of people asking questions on is on these 6324 domains, I don't see any cables running back and forth, back and forth between the two Fabric Interconnect I/O modules that we have in the back. That's where we added a new chassis that has traces in the back plane to actually allow the cluster interconnects to communicate between the A-side Fabric Interconnect I/O module and the B-side Fabric Interconnect I/O module. So that's something that we added on the hardware side to enable this new type of Fabric Interconnect. So what we're seeing here in the demo, let's start off, and you're seeing a view that has both, this is UCS Central 1.2, and I'm managing multiple types of servers here, or UCS domains here. I've got 5 domains registered into my environment, where 2 of them are UCS classic environments, so ones that were based off of the 6100 or 6200 domains. And the bottom 3 that you see the platform's called the UCS Mini, which is our, it's the 6324 based Fabric Interconnects. If I scroll down here to the bottom, if I open up one of those particular domains, and we'll do that here, and you can see that we're modeling, we model the 6324 Fabric Interconnect very much the same as we do with a 6100 or 6200 Fabric Interconnect. You can see that it's got a fixed module. In that fixed module, I've configured my environment where 2 of my ports are Ethernet ports that are configured for a server role. You can see the scalability port here as well. And that scalability port is that QSFP plus port, that new style of port that basically has a breakout cable that you can configure 4 10 gig connections out of it. In this case, I've got 2 of my 4 ports configured as server ports as well. And on my FC ports, you can see I've got 2 of them configured as 2 of those 4 single 10 gig ports configured as fiber channel. This particular one has the unified ports just like our 6200 Fabric Interconnect, so you can have that slider bar where you can specify the configuration. So if you look here, this is the UCS Manager 3.0 GUI for this particular domain that I was showing in Central. And so you can see a physical view of our Fabric Interconnect, this new 6324, where we have 4 physical ports, 4 10-gig ports as well as the QSFP here on the right. If I open up the unified ports configurator, you can see that again, this is the same domain I was showing in Central. You can see that I have, the first 2 ports configured as fiber channel, the second 2 ports configured as server ports, and then, on the QSFP, I've got a couple ports configured as server. You can see here we model this as a Fabric Interconnect and an I/O module. So the first view I was giving you is more of a traditional Fabric Interconnect view. The second view is more of your traditional I/O module view, where you can see the backplane ports that you use to have communicate between the I/O module and the actual servers themselves with the backplane. So you can see I've got both I/O modules configured, the A side and the B side. And if I go back up at the top here and click the hybrid display, you can see the hybrid display looks very much the same as what you would see on a 6100 or 6200. That all the blades will have different traces lit up between in the backplane to the actual I/O module, and then the ports going out of the Fabric Interconnect portion of this 6324 would communicate with either other rack mount servers that you would direct connect, or your uplink that you would go to your normal LAN, and then your fiber channel connectivity going to your normal SAN. Here you can see that I've got the ports configured as well. The same data that you were seeing in UCS Central before. I've got 2 ports configured as server ports. I've got my scalability ports where 2 of the 4 are configured as servers, and then I've got my fiber channel ports configured. So again, it's really the exact same data that you see in UCS Central versus UCS Manager.
That was a great demo. Now, Jacob mentioned that you're able to configure Fabric connections for both classic UCS as well as the new domains built on the 9324 Fabric Interconnects via UCS Central. Is that something that you can show our viewers today?
Yeah, that's a new feature that we added in 1.2. We've been really focusing on adding more of that day one configuration tasks that you would do to set up a net new domain in UCS Manager into UCS Central. And that's something we can show with configuring that same mini domain that we were doing. So remember, I had those 2 ports on that QSFP that weren't configured. And so let's say I want to configure those 2 as server ports. So I can right-click on a particular port and say configure as server, right-click on the other port, configure as server. I hit OK. And what ends up happening is UCS Central will communicate with UCS Manager and say, UCS Manager, please configure the server port with this configuration. So it's not policy-based like our service profiles and whatnot are. It's more of just a push configuration where you specify that in UCS Central, and UCS Central will drive UCS Manager through our API the same way you could do, say, with the script or what have you as well. But it does store the configuration of that setting of how it's configured in UCS Central, so you can see how in that inventory. So I did the A side. Let's go ahead and configure the B side as well. So if I go back to that scalability port or that QSFP Plus port, I can right-click and say configure as server port on both of these guys as well. Hit OK, and then configure the second one as well. And on this one, you can see that it's not the 4th port has yet to be configured. I got over to the Manager GUI quick enough to be able to see that it hasn't been configured yet. But if you watch here long enough, there UCS Central did its magic and sent that port configuration down to the UCS Mini. So this again works. I'm showing mainly on UCS Mini for this particular demo. In this particular demo is only Mini, but it works the same for Classic. As Jacob said, this only is supported for both Fabric, Fabric connections for uplinks and server ports. We don't have the fiber channel configuration yet, but that's something we're looking at potentially for the future.
Great. So one other feature that I heard about earlier in the Tech Talk is the Unified KVM Launch Manager. It sounds like a pretty interesting feature. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and how it's going to make customers' lives easier?
Yeah, that's it's a feature that we've had a lot of people ask for to say, hey, UCS Central is great, but I want to have a quick and easy way to launch my KVM for any of my servers. Is it a local service profile, a global service profile that I've created in Central or in UCS Manager directly? So let's actually go through a couple other examples of before we get to Unified Launch Manager. So for people that maybe are newer to UCS Central, they can kind of get a quick view of what it looks like. So in my environment, you can see here on the left side that I've got 4 local service profiles configured: prod server 1, 2, 3, and 4 in my environment. Today I don't have any global service profiles created. So let's go ahead and I've got this global service profile called dcloud GSP, and it terminates on a server pool called g-dcloud. That server pool I've populated with a bunch of different servers. I've got 36 servers in here that span across multiple domains. And one thing that's really key about the server pool, it spans across multiple domains, both for classic and this miniature UCS, that's 6324-based Fabric Interconnect. So this server pool has all servers from both types of domains in this particular pool. So in this case, I don't have any of them configured, but I want to spin up resources across my environment pretty quickly. Secondly, how I've got this service profile template configured, I've got it configured for both an out-of-band management IP address and an in-band management IP address. I will comment, this is not normally how you're probably going to set up your service profile. I've done it deliberately to show that one of the big features for our unified KVM is that we've actually allow you to specify the SIMC IP address if you have more than one configured on that service profile or the server that it's associated to. That'll actually pop up and let you pick the actual KVM IP address that you want to use for that communication. You want to use an in-band or out-of-band IP. So again, I've done that deliberately for this demo. So let's create some service profiles from template. We're going to create 10 of them. We're going to call this UCS-mini-test. This will be the prefix. And I want to dump them in the root organization. I'm going to hit OK here, and I've created those templates. If I hit OK and I go back to my global service profile view at the top, you'll see that I've got 10 configured, and they're getting associated to to servers across multiple domains. So if I sit here long enough, they all are going to be fully associated. And I hit refresh there on the top right. They're all now fully associated with the servers in my environment. If I open up that UCS GUI for the 6324 base domain, what you're going to see is I've got 3 service profiles. UCS Mini, Test 3, 6, and 9 have been applied to this particular domain. So when I created that global service profiles from template, 3 of them landed on this particular domain. The other 7 got loaded on other domains. So I'm actually, this could be in multiple environments across my data centers or my remote office and branch office environments. So now you can see I've got some running resources in my environment. On this particular UCS Mini Test 3 service profile, I'm going to look at the bottom here to show you, okay, I've got an IP address for both out-of-band and in-band. It's 10.10.30.102 for out-of-band and 20.30.40.102 for in-band. So if I go back up at the top of this particular screen and say, launch my KVM, what's going to end up happening is that it's going to basically, when I launch that KVM, it's going to give me a pop-up, and that pop-up's going to basically say, it's going to allow me to pick what address that I want to use to do a KVM launch. I'm not going to actually launch a KVM here. I think everyone on everyone on the call has seen a KVM window and whatnot. But this is again a new feature we've added into UCS Central that allows you to be able to pick the type of KVM that you want. So now if I go back to the login screen for UCS Central and provide my credentials, there's that Launch KVM button here on the right. that you see by the login button. So when I do that, I log in, I get a new screen for the version 1.2, where I can specify the organization in UCS Central that I want to search for service profiles. And so what you see here, this is a listing of all service profiles that UCS Central knows about. This is a mixture of both global and local service profiles in this case. And so what, this allows me to have a central launch point for all of my service profiles that UCS Central knows about. And if I right-click on that same UCS Mini Test 3, open the KVM console, again, it gives me that same view that shows me the number, the 2 IP addresses for those SIMCs that I've configured on that service profile. There could be a third or fourth option as well if we have SIMC IP addresses configured for the actual hardware itself, either in band or out of band. So again, it just really allows, this capability gives you a lot of freedom to be able to have a central launch point for all of your service profiles in UCS Central.
Oh, that was a great set of demos, Ewyk. Really good stuff. One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and Jacob brought it up earlier, is the VMIT. And we may have customers out there that may not know what the MIT is, let alone a VMIT. So could you tell us a little bit about this new feature and how it might impact UCS Central customers?
Yeah, most definitely. So a MIT stands for Management Information Tree. So that's a fancy term for an XML database. It's the term that we've used typically internally into Cisco and some externally to customers. But again, think of that as a data model or a database that we've created that describes the hardware, the physical inventory, and the configuration of the domain. So we've had this since day one with UCS Manager. We've had a MIT be managed by what we call a DME or a data management engine. That's that software. Basically, that's the heart and soul of UCS Manager that manages the inventory, monitors the servers, and deals with managing the configuration of those servers. So you guys, users of UCS Manager since day one have been using, been communicating with the DME and writing to our database or the MIT with our UCS Manager GUI, our CLIs, our API integrations like PowerShell or Python SDKs, or any of the other integrations that our third-party partners do or that Cisco has developed. So that's, again, the heart and soul of what UCS Manager is that having that CMDB, for lack of a better term, that we manage for both the inventory and the configuration and such. So in UCS Central, when we initially released UCS Central, we've had multiple DMEs or multiple databases, and we developed those multiple databases to segment logical data types together. Meaning, in a UCS Manager environment, when you're managing 160 servers, having everything in one database from a performance perspective is okay because the amount of data that you're going to store is not as much as if you're managing, let's say, 10,000 servers with UCS Central. That amount of data is a lot more. I mean, having all of that in one big database would cause some performance issues. So we segregated it by type. Like we've segregated it out by the different identifier pools are in one, the DME. We have some of the resources or physical inventory in another. We have our policies in another and statistics in another and so on. So they're segregated, logically more by function. And that's how we initially did it. That's our GUIs and CLIs. You'll see, and especially in the CLI, you'll see when I have to connect to, let's say, Stats Manager or Policy Manager to do some manipulation at the CLI. Again, that's really talking to those multiple DMEs. So it's good from a performance perspective, but harder for an end user to be able to understand where the data is stored differently. And that's really where this virtual MIT comes into play. We wanted to have the scalability with Central, but have the ease of use and kind of single throat to choke like we have with UCS Manager. And that's where the virtual MIT really comes into play, is to be that, that front end that we can aggregate all of that data into one view. So think of it as kind of like a database view across multiple databases that's aggregated and consolidated together, where we not only get a view, we can actually communicate with that single source, and it will communicate with all of the different DMEs on my behalf. So then all I have to connect to is one place. I only have to send my queries to one place, those types of things and such going forward. So that makes, again, people that are integrating with, like a DevOps guy, makes his job a lot easier, because all he has to do is know that, I connect to this one source and I can get everything. I can create a pool, I can create a policy, I can get inventory, I can associate a global service profile with a server across all of these domains, and I can do it all from a central point. So that's really where this virtual MIT concept came to fruition, and you will see us do more and more with it going forward to increase scalability for our GUIs and whatnot. We're going to be using it more and more internally, as well as provide more capabilities externally. One consumer of this virtual MIT, kind of day one, was really intended to be our integrations. So one thing that we, if anyone that used our beta version of our UCS Power Tool or our PowerShell module for UCS Central, one thing that you're going to notice is there's this thing called the dash provider option. And that provider option basically requires the user to specify, if I'm doing a commandlet, which of those DMEs to talk to. And so, again, the end user that's doing scripting would really need to know, okay, this data resides here, this data resides somewhere else, and again, it had a lot more complexity for an end user. So that's something that we're actually working to deprecate, where that particular beta version will be replaced here very shortly with a newer version of our PowerShell SDK, which will only communicate with this virtual MIT going forward. So that dash provider option that you have to specify today will go away, and it'll look and feel more like our UCS Manager Power Tool, where the only difference between, let's say, UCS Manager and UCS Central is the prefix. You have, if I'm trying to get information for a blade, I can say get-UCS compute blade or get UCS blade for UCS Manager. Well, the only difference between Central, instead of saying UCS for UCS Manager, I say UCS Central. So again, I can actually show a little bit of that. I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll go through a quick demo of our PowerShell SDK. So again, what I'm going to be showing is a release that's going to be coming pretty soon. It's not actually released yet, but it's going to be out as a second release of our beta on communities here really soon. So for folks that are listening, if you guys are familiar with UCS Manager's PowerShell library, you know how to connect to it. You basically you use connect-UCS. Well, in this case for Central, we just changed the prefix to be UCS from UCS to UCS Central. And so now you can say connect UCS Central, give my host name, and then it asks me for my credentials, and then I'm logged in. So I don't have to tell what DME to communicate and such. So you can see that I've connected to a UCS Central environment and running version 1.2.1a. And one thing to clarify on this particular is when I said that this is not yet released, I was talking about our PowerShell SDK that supports our UCS Power Tool for Central. That version 1.2.1a is the PowerShell library that supports 1.2.1a is a soon-coming product. UCS Central 1.2.1a is already generally available on Cisco.com. So once I've connected, then I can start running and running some commands against this environment. So I can do things like get my MAC pools that I've created in UCS Central. So these are those global MAC pools that I've created. Let's say I want to learn how to recreate that. So this, again, for folks that are familiar with UCS Power Tool for UCS Manager, a lot of this is going to be very similar. where I can get the Mac pool. So I'm going to do a get UCS Central Mac pool, give it the name. I want to get the Mac pool called dcloud-a. I do dash hierarchy to get all of its child objects, and I pipe that into convert to UCS Central commandlet. And what that does is it basically takes those objects and convert it into code. That's how I can recreate that Mac pool, or I could rename it and give it a different range to be able to modify or create. I can do things like get a service profile template. If I wanted to be able to recreate this one in a script, that one I was creating from before, the dcloud-gsp, I can basically run that command. It gets that particular service profile, add the dash hierarchy to it, run it through convert to UCS Central commandlet, and boom, I get the code to actually recreate that service profile template. So for those who are, again, familiar with UCS Manager's version, this is a lot of the same capability we have in our UCS Central version. You can do some other fun things like where if you wanted to create a service profile from template. So I want to create a service profile in the root org on UCS Central. So you can see I just got the root org and added it to a variable. I'm going to get the service profile template name called dcloud-gsp, and it'll be an initial template. And that's going to reside in the root org. And so you can see I've got the service profile template. And then I can run the add UCS service profile commandlet here in just a second to basically add a service profile from that particular template. So I do add UCS Central service profile. I want to add the service profile called Bob in the root organization, and it's going to use that service profile template that I got before as its source. So you can see here that I've added it, and if I get that service profile again, what you'll see is now it's been applied. So now you can see that its associated state is associated, so that service profile has went through its FSM tasks, and it's been applied to that particular blade. So again, this was a really quick, short demo of what is possible with our Powershell SDK. We'll be adding more over time to our community's website. So watch our communities.cisco.com/UCS integrations page for our new Powershell SDK, the one I'm showing here. This is a development release, as well as some sample scripts.
Thanks, Ewyk. It sounds like a great opportunity for the next revision of PowerScripting contest. So great demo. Thank you so much for all of the detailed information on UCS Central. I want to change gears now and bring in Brad. So Brad's been patiently waiting here. And Brad, I know you've talked and worked with a number of customers and have been heavily involved in helping customers adopt UCS Central. Can you tell us a little bit about how customers have been utilizing Central across the various UCS Central releases?
Absolutely. So when we look at typical customers, customers fall into one of two camps. There's the greenfield customers, which are the customers that have never deployed UCS, and then there's the brownfield customers, which are customers that are already running UCS. So if you're already running UCS and you bring in UCS Central into that environment, there's some migration steps that need to occur. So for a brownfield customer, there's a fair amount of work that needs to go into setting up that brownfield customer and making sure that they can adopt all of the features of UCS Central. And for a lot of customers, that's a pretty big lift.
So what's the implementation strategies or philosophies that you would recommend to customers for a successful adoption of UCS Central?
Sure. Well, like I just said, it's a big lift for a customer that hasn't started from day one with UCS Central, right? That greenfield customer had the advantage in that they could take UCS Central and sort of begin running everything out of the UCS Central framework from day one. Well, now for that brownfield customer, like I said, it's a big lift. And so there's some best practices that we can follow, and there's some tools that we've actually built that can really help ease that burden, if you will. Number one is take full advantage of the UCS platform emulator. The platform emulator allows you to basically emulate a live running UCS environment. So I can build a complete mirrored copy of my data center in emulated copies and run that in basically an emulated environment, and so that I can basically build this pseudo environment that is a precise duplicate of my running live production environment. I can do that via a live import. I can even point the emulator at a running system and just perform a live import of the hardware of that running system. I can also do a config all backup if I wanted to, where I can just take a backup of a real live running UCS Manager instance and import that into the platform emulator. And so that helps me basically pull my environment into an emulated environment. And so now I can start testing some of these changes that I want to make through UCS Central as the tool for managing this emulated environment. And like I said, there's a fair amount of work for migrating that brownfield environment into a UCS centrally managed environment. But I believe that the benefits of doing that are really worth the effort. And so there's an adoption strategy that tends to work pretty well that I've worked with many customers on, and it tends to be a pretty successful approach. And it's to really start simple. So number one, take all of your domains and just register them with UCS Central today. If you register those UCS domains with UCS Central, there's a lot of advantages that you get. Right? You have that global inventory. You have that global fault aggregation. Just purely by registering your UCS systems, you enable statistics. You enable the ability to do backups and some of those types of things just by registering those systems. And then begin, so kind of step number two. This is really a five-step approach. Number one being registered. Number two, begin to opt in to a policy resolution control on a policy-by-policy basis. So as you become more comfortable with UCS Central controlling certain administrative policies, you can begin to opt in one at a time if you'd like. And then begin defining so step number three would really be defining and importing your local pools and your local policies into UCS Central, and kind of get all those set up in your UCS Central environment. And then begin, step number four would be defining and importing your service profile templates, all of your local service profile templates. And from that point, once you've kind of built out that framework and kind of completed step four, kind of adopt a change in philosophy, if you will. That change in philosophy really says that, hey, beginning now, every new service profile that we create must be a global service profile. So once you've kind of adopted that change in philosophy, then you can move on to really step five, which is begin tackling the migration of all of your local service profiles and converting those to global service profiles.
Now, Brad, let me get this right, and I got a follow-on question for you. Do customers really need to fully migrate their environments from local to global to take advantage of UCS Central?
So that's a really good point. The first four items that I just walked through are pretty easy asks. They're pretty simple to do, and you get a lot of advantages in really taking advantage of those first four. But that fifth one tends to be the one that makes this the big lift for the brownfield environment. And so I always like to have more of a consultative approach with the customers and ask them a few questions before they begin to tackle step five, and that is, do my identifiers that I have in my local service profiles really need to stay the same if I migrate those to global service profiles? And if the answer to that question is no, well, this is pretty easy. It's real easy for me to just redefine those as global service profiles. But if the answer to that question is yes, that's a lot of work. And so then I ask them, if they say yes, I really, jump into the next question, which is, can I just leverage UCS Central for local service profile management? In other words, if they've said, hey, I really need those identifiers to stay the same, what I might want to do is discourage them from actually completing the migration and just using UCS Central as the tool to manage those local service profiles. So through UCS Central interface, I can see all those local service profiles. I can power them on, power them off, and launch KVM. And there's a lot of things that I can do through that UCS Central interface with local service profiles. So there's really, in that case, no need for doing a migration. So it really boils down to what the customer wants to do. Now, down the road, we do have, we are kicking around and we are considering building a tool or a wizard to help do that migration. But these are, there's no commitments there. These are things that we are considering to help customers with this burden. But at this point, there are no firm plans to do anything like that.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. Now, what advantages might a customer recognize using UCS Central in a smaller UCS environment, say just for 1 or 2 domains?
Right. So we've been talking about these big monstrosity environments of many UCS systems. So now, if I'm a customer that's got 1 UCS domain or maybe 2, yeah, there's quite a bit of benefits that you get just by registering that domain or 1 or 2 domains to UCS Central. Number one, each UCS environment gathers a lot of very, very detailed statistics, but the problem with that is those roll off the Fabric Interconnects over time, and so you can't keep that statistical data around. So with UCS Central, I can roll all that information into the UCS Central appliance, if you will, and slice and dice on that data, report on it. I can even use my own SQL tools to basically build fancy reports off of that data. It's completely up to you. Number 2 is I have the ability to really do centralized backup and restore of my environment. I can now schedule backups of each of those UCS domains and restore those UCS domains if need be, and I can back up my UCS Central environment as well. Number 3, I get centralized firmware management. So I now have the ability to see all of that information at the UCS Central level. I can see real-time what's available to me on Cisco.com for firmware, and I can use that as the tool to initiate updates of both the infrastructure as well as my servers themselves. And then, kind of the last one, which is kind of a big one depending on the type of customer you are, and that is you get enhanced role-based access, where role-based access that you get with UCS Manager is very good, very solid, but the role-based access that you get with UCS Central allows me to really lock down not only what things I can and cannot do, but what I can see. So I can actually lock it down by locale. And so now, if I don't have permission to see something, I actually cannot see it. So a little bit different approach on role-based access.
Perfect. So thanks so much for that insight. Now I want to direct all of those participants and listeners who've been with us for the last hour, remind them of our community site. The URL is communities.cisco.com/UCS, where you can find a lot more information on UCS Central, including an updated version of the UCS Central Best Practices document, as well as that's where we're going to be posting PowerTool for UCS Central, which supports the virtual MIT, which Ewyk demoed for us. So that's a great repository, not only for those resources, but also if you want to catch a replay of this session or any of our other tech talks. Again, we're hosting these roughly monthly, so if you're looking for either a recording or the next session, that's a great place to go. We look forward to your ongoing engagement on our community site. Again, communities.cisco.com/UCS. It will also be posted down below on the screen, so please click through. For those of you on the panel, Jacob, Ewyk, Brad, very, very insightful information, a lot of great data, a lot of great demos. I want to thank you for spending your time here today to present this content, and for the attendees, I want to thank you for your engagement, for your attention today. And again, the recording will be posted and available directly after this Tech Talk concludes. So again, thank you and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.